Have you ever stopped to think about how our ancestors marked the passage of time, not with calendars or clocks, but with roaring bonfires, rhythmic dances, and offerings to the gods? Long before supermarkets and smartphones, ancient civilizations lived by nature's heartbeat, and their most sacred moments weren't just dates on a stone tablet. They were explosions of color, sound, and meaning. Picture this: the winter solstice arrives, and across the frozen landscapes of Europe, communities gather to light fires so massive they are said to coax the sun itself back from the edge of darkness. Or imagine the vibrant festivals of the Maya, where the spring equinox transformed pyramids into dazzling light shows, their steps aligning perfectly with the sun's rays like a celestial handshake. These weren't just parties, they were acts of survival, prayers woven into the very fabric of the seasons. What's truly astonishing is how much of these forgotten festivals still lingers in our modern world. That harvest festival in your hometown, it echoes the ancient Greek Thesmophoria, where women celebrated the earth's fertility with secret rites, the lanterns floating on water during certain holidays. They mirror the Mesopotamian Akitu festival, where clay boats carrying offerings sailed down the Euphrates to honor the gods of renewal. These traditions weren't lost, they evolved, hiding in plain sight, because the human connection to nature's cycles is unbreakable. And that's why uncovering these ancient celebrations matters. They're a mirror held up to our own lives, revealing how deeply we've always needed rituals to make sense of time, change, and our place in the universe. So let's embark on a journey together through solstice celebrations that defied the longest nights, equinox rituals that balanced the scales of light and dark, and harvest festivals that turned gratitude into art. We'll explore how the Romans danced to honor Flora, goddess of flowers, and how the Celts believed bonfires could ward off spirits during Samhain, the festival that would one day become Halloween. By the time we're done, you'll never look at a seasonal holiday the same way again, because these weren't just ancient traditions. They were the original language of human connection to the earth, a language we're still speaking today, even if we've forgotten the words. Ready to decode them? Let's begin. The concept of time wasn't just measured in days and months for our ancestors. It was woven into the very fabric of their existence through the wheel of the year. Imagine living in a world where the lengthening shadows of autumn or the first buds of spring weren't just weather changes, but sacred signals to begin rituals that sustained entire communities. The Celts, for instance, didn't just mark Samhain as the end of harvest. They saw it as a thin veil between worlds, a night when the dead could walk among the living. Over in Mesopotamia, the Akitu festival wasn't merely a New Year's celebration. It was a 12-day reenactment of the cosmos' rebirth, complete with processions, sacrifices, and even a symbolic battle where the king's humility was tested to ensure the gods' favor. These calendars were more than tools, they were living blueprints for survival. What's fascinating is how these systems emerged independently across cultures, yet shared striking similarities. The Mayans, masters of celestial observation, built pyramids that doubled as astronomical calculators, their steps aligning with the sun's path during equinoxes like stone sundials. Meanwhile, Neolithic farmers in Britain arranged massive stone circles like Stonehenge, where the summer solstice sunrise pierced precisely between pillars, signaling the year's turning point. These weren't coincidences, they were proof of humanity's universal drive to sync with nature's rhythms. Even the smallest festivals, like the Roman Floralia in May, where streets erupted in flower battles and nighttime dances, served a purpose: to coax the earth into fertility after winter's grip. But how did these calendars shape everyday life? Picture a Norse farmer in Scandinavia, whose entire year revolved around the Yule festival. The solstice wasn't just a date, it was the moment to slaughter livestock before winter scarcity, to share mead-soaked feasts that staved off darkness, both literal and spiritual. Or consider the ancient Chinese, whose Qingming festival in early April wasn't just about honoring ancestors, it was the signal to begin planting, as the earth warmed enough for seeds to thrive. These festivals were alarms set by the cosmos itself, dictating when to sow, when to reap, even when to marry or move homes. To ignore them wasn't just a cultural misstep, it risked famine, chaos, or the gods' wrath. Yet perhaps the most profound legacy of these calendars is how they transformed time from a linear march into a sacred circle. The Aztecs, for example, didn't just count years. They believed in cyclical suns, each an era destined to repeat. The Hindu festival of Makar Sankranti, marking the sun's northward journey, still sees millions release floating lanterns today, symbolizing the endless cycle of light conquering darkness. These weren't primitive superstitions, they were profound philosophies disguised as celebration. They remind us that time isn't just something we measure, it's something we live, a dance where every step from solstice to equinox is choreographed by the stars. When the sun reached its lowest point in the sky and the world seemed to hold its breath in darkness, ancient civilizations didn't despair. They threw some of the most vibrant celebrations in human history. Take the Roman Saturnalia, where for 7 days social order flipped upside down. Masters served meals to their enslaved people, children ruled households, and streets filled with laughter, gambling, and the glow of countless candles. This wasn't just a party, it was a radical act of defiance against winter's grip, a way to reignite the warmth of community when nature felt coldest. The Norse took a different but equally powerful approach. Their Yule festival centered on the Yule log, an enormous oak trunk burned for 12 days straight, its flames symbolizing the undying promise of the sun's return. Families gathered around these fires, feasting on preserved meats and telling stories of gods and heroes, weaving light into the long night through shared memory. What's remarkable is how these traditions, separated by thousands of miles, echoed the same profound understanding. The solstice wasn't an end, but a turning point. The Incas in South America held Inti Raymi, where priests used golden mirrors to capture the sun's rays and redirect them into sacred spaces, literally funneling light into the earth. In Persia, the festival of Yalda saw families staying awake all night, eating pomegranates and watermelon, their red flesh symbolizing the dawn's eventual glow, while poets recited verses about light conquering darkness. Even the Dongjai festival in ancient China turned the solstice into a culinary ritual, with families eating glutinous rice balls called tangyuan, their round shape mirroring the sun and their sweetness a promise of brighter days ahead. But why did this single astronomical moment inspire such universal reverence? The answer lies in something deeper than mythology or agriculture. The winter solstice was humanity's first great test of faith, not in gods but in nature itself. When the world grew still and cold, when crops withered and nights stretched endlessly, these festivals were acts of collective courage. They said, "We believe the sun will return," before any evidence appeared. That's why so many solstice rituals involved light in motion. Roman candles carried through streets, Celtic villagers rolling flaming wheels down hillsides, or Hanukkah's menorah candles added one by one as nights lengthened. Each flickering flame was a tiny rebellion against despair, a way to physically enact the future they hoped to see. The legacy of these solstice celebrations still pulses through our modern holidays. Christmas lights strung on rooftops, They descend from the Norse custom of decorating homes with evergreens and candles to remind the sun of life's persistence. The tradition of gift-giving during December, a direct inheritance from Saturnalia's exchange of small tokens called sigillaria. Even our New Year's resolutions echo the solstice's theme of renewal, a chance to step out of darkness and redefine ourselves. These ancient festivals teach us that the coldest, darkest moments are precisely when we must kindle hope, not blindly, but with the same deliberate care as those Yule logs, fed steadily until the world turns warm again. While the winter solstice marked nature's deepest slumber, the Celts knew the earth never truly slept. By early February, when frost still clung to the fields, they sensed a shift, a whisper of life beneath the soil. This was Imbolc, the festival of the Thor, where the goddess Brigid, keeper of fire and fertility, was honored with flames that mirrored the returning sun's strength. Villagers would light candles in every window, not just to push back the darkness, but to mimic the increasing daylight, willing the sun to grow bolder. They blessed seeds saved from the last harvest, an act of faith that these tiny, dormant things would soon meet a world ready to receive them. Even the livestock played a role. Ewes began to lactate, their milk symbolizing the land's impending abundance. Imbolc wasn't just a date on a calendar, it was a collective exhale, the moment when hope became tangible. The brilliance of Imbolc lies in its delicate balance between practicality and poetry. Take the custom of crafting Brigid's crosses from reeds. These intricate sun symbols weren't just decorations. Hung over doorways, they were believed to protect homes and barns from lightning and fire, harnessing the goddess's dual power over both destruction and renewal. Then there was the Brat Bride, a cloth left outside on Imbolc Eve to catch Brigid's blessing as she wandered the land. Folded away and later used to soothe ailments, it turned belief into medicine. These rituals reveal a profound truth. For the Celts, the boundary between the spiritual and the everyday was fluid. A blessed seed wasn't just a prayer for good crops, it was the crop itself, charged with divine intention. It's astonishing how Imbolc's echoes persist in traditions we barely question. Groundhog Day, with its rodent meteorologist, descends directly from Celtic weather divination, where serpents or badgers were said to predict spring's arrival based on their shadow. The deep cleaning many of us do as winter fades, that's Imbolc's spring cleaning legacy, rooted in the purification rites that swept away not just dust but stagnant energy. Even St. Brigid's feast day in Christianity, with its candlelit processions, seamlessly absorbed the older festival's fire symbolism. This isn't coincidence, it's proof of how deeply these seasonal markers are wired into human culture. What makes Imbolc especially poignant is its quiet optimism. Unlike solstice celebrations with their roaring bonfires, Imbolc relied on the humble candle's glow, a recognition that spring arrives not with a fanfare, but with subtle signs, a softening breeze, the first green shoots defiant against the cold. The Celts understood that transition isn't instant, it's a slow unfurling, requiring patience and attentiveness. In our modern lives, where seasons blur under artificial light and climate control, Imbolc invites us to reclaim that awareness. When we plant window herbs in February or open windows to chase out winter's stale air, we're participating in an ancient rhythm, one that taught our ancestors to watch, listen, and trust in the earth's quiet, persistent resilience. When the scales of daylight and darkness balanced perfectly each spring, ancient peoples didn't just note the equinox, they threw a celebration that would shape traditions for millennia. The Germanic tribes called it Ostara, named after the dawn goddess Eoster, whose very presence was said to coax flowers from the earth and coax life from its winter slumber. But this wasn't just a festival of rejoicing, it was a masterclass in symbolism. Eggs carefully painted or buried in the soil weren't mere decorations. They were tiny universes, their shells holding the promise of rebirth. Hares darting through fields with uncanny fertility became living emblems of nature's unstoppable creativity. Every ritual, from the lighting of bonfires at dawn to the sharing of honey cakes, was designed to mirror the equinox's perfect equilibrium, a fleeting moment when the cosmos itself seemed to pause, take a breath, and reset. What's fascinating is how these customs reveal a world where balance wasn't just an idea, it was a force to be actively cultivated. In Anglo-Saxon villages, families would place eggs at the corners of their fields, not as offerings but as anchors, believing their symmetrical placement could harmonize the land's energy. Women braided their hair with ribbons of green and gold, weaving together the colors of earth and sun, while children rolled eggs down hillsides, their motion mimicking the sun's journey across the sky. Even the food served, sweet and savory, light and hearty, were carefully paired to honor the equinox's duality. This wasn't superstition, it was a form of participatory magic where humans became co-creators of the seasonal shift. The legacy of Ostara lingers in ways we rarely pause to recognize. Those Easter baskets lined with fake grass, they descend from Germanic nests built to attract Eosta's hare, a creature believed to lay eggs as gifts. The very word Easter in English traces back to Eosta's name, while the tradition of sunrise services echoes the equinox bonfires lit to greet the returning sun. Even the popular myth of the Easter Bunny isn't some modern invention, it's a direct descendant of Ostara's sacred hares, their fertility so legendary that medieval Christians had to rebrand rather than ban them. But perhaps the most profound lesson of Ostara lies in its insistence on balance as an active practice. Unlike our modern view of equilibrium as passive, something we achieve and maintain, the ancients saw it as dynamic, a dance requiring constant attention. The equinox wasn't just observed, it was performed, with every painted egg and planted seed serving as a reminder. Harmony isn't found, it's made. In an age where we're overwhelmed by extremes, work versus rest, consumption versus conservation, Ostara's rituals whisper an alternative. They ask us to consider how we might plant our own symbolic eggs, light our own balancing fires, and become not just witnesses to nature's cycles, but participants in them. The 1st of May arrived not with a whisper, but with a roar, the crackling roar of Beltane's bonfires, their flames licking the twilight sky as the Celts ushered in summer's reign. This wasn't just a seasonal marker, it was an explosion of life's raw energy. Picture the scene, couples, hands clasped, sprinting and leaping over glowing embers, their laughter mixing with the snap of burning wood. The higher the jump, the greater the blessing, fertility for crops, for livestock, and for their own love. Nearby, cattle were herded between twin fires, the smoke curling around their hides like a protective spell against disease and misfortune. Even the simplest acts carried weight. Flowers woven into hair, doors hung with rowan branches, and buckets of well water left overnight to absorb the morning dew, believed to grant eternal youth. Beltane was more than a festival. It was a collision of joy and necessity where survival and celebration danced as one. Fire's dominance in these rituals wasn't arbitrary. To ancient peoples, flames were alchemy in motion, a force that could turn the raw into the cooked, the worthless into the valuable, the dangerous into the safe. When Beltane's fires blazed, they weren't just pushing back the lingering chill of spring, they were enacting a cosmic reset. The Celts saw smoke as a conduit to the otherworld, carrying prayers to deities like Belenus, the shining god whose name gave the festival its title. But there was gritty practicality too. The ashes from these sacred fires were scattered over fields, a literal fertilization of the soil with the remnants of ritual. Fire purified, yes, but it also fed. It was destruction and creation bound together, just as Beltane itself straddled the threshold between spring's tenderness and summer's fierceness. The festival's echoes linger in traditions we've stripped of their primal roots. Maypole dancing, with its ribbons weaving downward like vines, began as a Celtic invocation of the world tree, its patterns mirroring the spiral of life. The crowning of a May Queen, a distant relative of ceremonies where a maiden represented the goddess Flora, her floral crown a magnet for nature's benevolence. Even the modern notion of a May Day holiday carries whispers of Beltane's worker celebrations, when labor paused to honor the earth's generosity. What makes Beltane so captivating is its unapologetic embrace of life's visceral pulse. Where other festivals focused on solemnity or sacrifice, this one reveled in sensory abundance. The taste of fresh dairy, the scent of hawthorn blossoms, the warmth of bonfires on bare skin. It acknowledged that summer wasn't just a season of plenty, but of passion, a time when the world's vitality demanded participation, not passive observation. In an age where we've tamed fire into pilot lights and screen glow, Beltane invites us to remember its wilder role not just as a tool, but as a living bridge between the human and the divine, between the soil's quiet potential and the blazing certainty of the sun. When the sun reached its highest arc in the sky, painting the world in golden light that stretched well past midnight in some lands, ancient cultures didn't just celebrate, they channeled that power. At Stonehenge, where towering stones stand like silent sentinels, the summer solstice sunrise pierces precisely between the heel stone and slaughter stone, casting a blade of light down the central aisle. This wasn't accidental architecture, it was a solar cathedral built to capture the year's most potent moment. But the reverence didn't stop there. Across Europe, Slavic tribes celebrated Cupola night with bonfires so immense their glow rivaled the twilight. Young lovers, hands linked, leapt over flames together, not just for luck but as a test of devotion. If their grip held midair, so would their bond. Nearby, rivers shimmered with floating wreaths of flowers, their petals carrying wishes downstream like whispers to the gods. The solstice wasn't merely about light's triumph, it was about harnessing its energy. In Scandinavia, villagers erected maypoles wrapped in greenery, their circular dances mimicking the sun's path across the heavens. The Aztecs, meanwhile, climbed pyramids to offer amaranth dough shaped like the sun god Huitzilopochtli, their rituals a plea for his strength to sustain them through coming seasons. Even in ancient Egypt, where the Nile's flood season aligned with the solstice, priests tracked the star Sirius's rise to predict the life-giving water's arrival. These weren't disconnected traditions, they were variations on a universal theme. The sun at its zenith was a battery, and rituals were the cables through which its power could be tapped. What's striking is how these celebrations blended exhilaration with solemnity. The Welsh would gather mistletoe believed to hold the sun's essence, with golden sickles, careful never to let it touch the ground lest its magic seep away. In Persia, families baked saffron-infused bread shaped like radiant suns, sharing it as edible talismans of health. And in the Andes, where winter solstice was summer for the northern hemisphere, the Incas still honored Inti Raymi with a mock battle between light and dark, their actors clad in gold and shadow reenacting the eternal struggle. These rituals reveal a nuanced understanding. The solstice wasn't just light's victory party, it was the opening of a fragile window, a fleeting chance to align human lives with celestial forces before the days began their inevitable wane. The summer solstice's legacy endures in ways we've forgotten to notice. Those flower crowns trendy at music festivals, they descend from Cupola night's fern wreaths, worn to absorb the sun's wisdom. Bonfires at beach parties, pale echoes of the sacred flames that once carried prayers skyward. Even modern solar energy research, with its quest to capture the sun's raw power, mirrors ancient alchemy, just with silicon panels instead of golden mirrors. These connections remind us that our awe of the sun hasn't dimmed. It's simply changed forms. The solstice whispers that we're still in our hearts, those fire-leaping, wreath-floating ancestors, still reaching for the light, still humbled by its gift. By the time August's heat began to soften, the Celts weren't just watching the seasons turn, they were rolling up their sleeves to meet the earth halfway. Lugnasad, named for the god Lug of many skills, wasn't a passive celebration of harvest. It was a communal act of partnership with the land. Picture this: golden fields rippling like liquid sunlight, scythes flashing as the first sheaves of grain fell, their stalks carrying the weight of an entire winter's survival. But before a single loaf could be baked, before any feast could begin, there was ceremony. The cutting of the first grain wasn't just agricultural work. It was a sacred performance, often led by the community's most respected elder, their hands moving with the precision of ritual as much as practicality. Every motion, from the swing of the sickle to the binding of the stalks, was steeped in intention, as if the harvest itself depended on reverence as much as labor. What made Lugnasad extraordinary was its duality, equal parts thanksgiving and tension. The first loaf, baked from the new grain, often shaped into intricate spirals or woven designs, was more than food. It was an offering, a physical token of trust that the earth would provide enough to last until spring. Families would bring these loaves to hilltop gatherings where they'd be blessed and shared, ensuring the community's collective well-being. Yet beneath the feasting and games, the foot races, the wrestling matches honoring Lug's athletic prowess, there lurked an unspoken anxiety. A poor harvest now meant empty bellies later. This festival wasn't just about gratitude, it was about confronting the fragile line between abundance and scarcity, a reminder that nature's generosity wasn't guaranteed but earned through skill, timing, and a bit of divine favor. The festival's echoes persist in ways we've nearly forgotten. Ever wondered why county fairs cluster in late summer? Those blue ribbon competitions for the fattest pumpkin or tallest sunflower are distant cousins to Lugnasad's displays of agricultural prowess. Even the Christianized version, lammas from the Old English hlaf mis, meaning loaf mass, kept the grain's sanctity, with churches blessing baskets of bread well into medieval times. And let's not overlook the modern obsession with harvest-themed festivals, where apple bobbing and corn mazes unknowingly channel the Celts' blend of practicality and play. But perhaps Lugnasad's most enduring lesson is its insistence on celebration as a form of reciprocity. Unlike solstices or equinoxes dictated by celestial events, this festival was triggered by human hands meeting ripe grain, a collaboration between earth and labor. The games weren't just entertainment, they were displays of the vitality needed to face coming hardships. The feasts weren't indulgence, but investments in social bonds that would sustain communities through lean months. In an age where harvest means supermarket aisles perpetually stocked, Lugnasad whispers a radical idea. Abundance isn't just found, it's forged through attention, effort, and the courage to celebrate amid uncertainty. Those first loaves shared on hillsides centuries ago were more than bread. They were edible hope. As the autumn equinox arrived and day and night hung in perfect balance once more, the Celts didn't just count their blessings, they wrestled with them. Mabon, named for the Welsh god of youth and the harvest, was a festival of contradictions, a lavish feast set against the backdrop of looming scarcity, a celebration tinged with urgency. Picture the scene: baskets overflowing with apples still warm from the orchard, barrels of freshly pressed cider, and sheaves of grain stacked like golden sentinels. Yet beneath the laughter and the clinking of cups, there was an undercurrent of calculation: how much to eat now, how much to preserve, how much to sacrifice to ensure the gods' favor. This wasn't just Thanksgiving, it was a high-stakes negotiation with the future. The apple, more than any other symbol, captured Mabon's duality. Cut crosswise, its seeds formed a five-pointed star, a sacred shape representing the otherworld's protection. Yet that same fruit, left uneaten, would rot. Ancient peoples understood this tension intimately. In Ireland, villagers would bury apples at crossroads as offerings to spirits, ensuring their goodwill during the barren months. In Brittany, they floated apples in sacred wells, their bobbing motion believed to predict the winter's severity. Even the act of harvesting was ritualized. The last sheaf of grain, often woven into a corn dolly, wasn't just a decoration, it housed the field's spirit, safeguarded until spring planting could release it anew. These weren't superstitions, they were survival strategies dressed in myth. What's striking is how Mabon's rituals transformed anxiety into action. The Germanic tribes held Thanksgiving markets where surplus goods were traded, not just for profit, but to redistribute resources before winter isolated communities. The Greeks celebrated the Thesmophoria around the same time, with women burying rotted piglets to fertilize next year's crops, a literal recycling of decay into potential. Even the act of feasting had purpose. By consuming perishables like grapes and fresh bread first, communities systematically prioritized preservation. This wasn't hoarding, it was a communal calculus where every bite carried the weight of foresight. The autumn equinox's legacy lingers in traditions we've stripped of their urgency. Modern harvest festivals, with their pumpkin displays and cornucopias, are Mabon's gentler descendants. The Jewish Sukkot, with its temporary shelters and fruit hangings, echoes the same theme of impermanence and gratitude. Even our instinct to stockpile pantry staples as days shorten is a biological whisper of ancestral winters. But Mabon's deeper lesson isn't about preparation, it's about paradox. The Celts didn't just accept that joy and worry could coexist. They ritualized it, weaving both into the very fabric of the festival. Their bonfires burned as bright as summers, yet their songs carried the minor key of coming frost. They understood that true resilience isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to celebrate in its shadow, to bite into a ripe apple, savor its sweetness, and still have the courage to bury one for the gods. When the last leaves clung to the oaks and the year's light faded to a whisper, the Celts didn't just mark time's passage, they braced for a collision of worlds. Samhain, their New Year's Eve, wasn't merely a date change. It was the night the veil between the living and the dead grew thin as mist. Picture the scene, villages ringed by towering bonfires, their smoke curling into the starless dark like bridges to the other world. Families extinguished every hearth flame, then relit them from these sacred fires, a symbolic rebirth of light as the year turned. But this wasn't just ceremony, it was defense. The Celts believed spirits, both benevolent and mischievous, wandered freely on Samhain, and every ritual served as protection. Costumes crafted from animal hides weren't early Halloween fun. They were disguises to confuse vengeful ghosts. Apples buried in sacred springs weren't games, but offerings to ancestors who might share wisdom or withhold it. Even the act of leaving empty chairs at feast tables carried weight, an invitation to departed loved ones that could mean blessing or haunting. The genius of Samhain lay in how it transformed fear into framework. Take the tradition of dumb supper, where meals were eaten in reverse order, dessert first, as the dead were believed to experience time backward. Silence wasn't just respect, it was a way to eavesdrop on spirit whispers. Divination rituals peeling an apple in one unbroken strip to reveal a future lover's initial, or tossing hazelnuts into flames to predict survival weren't mere superstition. They were coping mechanisms, ways to assert control when the universe felt most unstable. The dying year wasn't just a meteorological event, it was a psychological threshold, and Samhain's rituals provided handholds across the abyss. What's fascinating is how universally cultures linked autumn to the supernatural. In Mexico, the Aztecs celebrated Mictlantecuhtli, goddess of the underworld, with skull decorations and ancestor altars, traditions that evolved into Dia de los Muertos. The Japanese held Obon, lighting lanterns to guide spirits home. Even the ancient Egyptians aligned their festival of the dead with the Nile's receding waters when the land seemed to wither. This wasn't coincidence. As crops died and days shortened, the natural world mirrored the afterlife's barrenness, making the unseen feel unnervingly close. Samhain's fingerprints are everywhere in modern Halloween, from jack-o'-lanterns, originally carved turnips holding coal from sacred fires, to trick-or-treating rooted in souling, where the poor offered prayers for the dead in exchange for food. But its deepest legacy is the permission to confront darkness with creativity. Those spine-tingling ghost stories around campfires, they're descendants of Celtic tales told to explain unexplained noises in the night. The thrill of haunted houses, a safe way to flirt with the terrors that once kept our ancestors vigilant. Samhain reminds us that fear, when ritualized, becomes not just bearable but beautiful, a dance with the unknown that honors both its danger and its mystery. In the heart of winter, when shadows stretched long across the Roman Forum, the empire performed a magic trick. It disappeared. Not literally, of course, but socially, for 7 riotous days when Saturnalia turned the world upside down. Picture this: senators waiting tables for their enslaved staff, children issuing absurd decrees that adults had to obey, and streets alive with the rattle of dice gambling, strictly forbidden any other time, suddenly legal and encouraged. Even the sternest patrician might be spotted wearing the pileus, the floppy felt cap normally reserved for freed slaves, its very fabric a thumbed nose at hierarchy. This wasn't just revelry, it was societal alchemy, where the leaden weight of Roman order transmuted into the gold of temporary anarchy. The genius of Saturnalia lay in its precision. Like a pressure valve on a boiling pot, it released steam at carefully timed intervals. The festival honored Saturn, the god of agriculture who ruled during Rome's mythical Golden Age, a time before social classes when all men were equal. By resurrecting this egalitarian fantasy annually, Rome acknowledged the strains of its rigid structure while cleverly reinforcing it. After all, what better way to sustain inequality the other 358 days than to briefly let everyone play at its opposite? The master serving meals wasn't just humoring his staff, he was demonstrating the stability of his power by showing he could safely relinquish it. The enslaved person giving orders wasn't upending the system, they were proving it could bend without breaking. Gift-giving, one of Saturnalia's most enduring legacies, reveals even deeper layers. The sigillaria, small clay or wax figurines exchanged during the festival, weren't just trinkets. Some bore the faces of gods, others caricatures of politicians, and many were bawdy jokes molded into tangible form. These tokens allowed Romans to say the unsayable, to mock the mighty without consequence, because Saturnalia's rules suspended normal social penalties. A nobleman might receive a figurine of himself with an exaggerated nose or a god in compromising poses, and by tradition he'd have to laugh along. The modern Secret Santa, with its gentle roasts and cheeky presents, is a distant descendant of this ancient pressure release. But Saturnalia's wildness had limits, and therein lay its true sophistication. The festival always began with a solemn sacrifice at Saturn's temple, a reminder that this chaos was sanctioned, not spontaneous. The poet Lucian captures the paradox perfectly, describing how Saturnalia's celebrants would shout, "Eo Saturnalia," as they broke rules, using the very invocation as both permission slip and containment field. The world might turn upside down, but only because the gods, and by extension the state, allowed it. Even the timing was strategic, held in December when military campaigns paused and agricultural work slowed. Saturnalia minimized disruption to the empire's productivity. What can this ancient festival teach us about our own need for release? Modern office holiday parties, with their loosened ties and cringe-worthy karaoke, unknowingly channel Saturnalia's spirit. The thrill of costume parties, where CEOs dress as janitors and interns as royalty, taps into that same timeless hunger to briefly escape our roles. Even protest movements sometimes adopt Saturnalia's tactics. Think of the Carnival Against Capitalism events, where activists use humor and absurdity to critique power structures. The Romans understood something profound. Societies, like individuals, need to exhale. By ritualizing rebellion, they made it manageable, transforming what could have been revolutionary fury into a week of cathartic play. Saturnalia's greatest lesson isn't about chaos, it's about control. Not the stifling kind, but the wisdom to recognize that freedom, when carefully portioned, doesn't destroy order, it preserves it. The Peleus cap returned to the closet, the dice were packed away, and Rome woke up to business as usual, but something subtle had shifted. For 7 days, every citizen, from slave to consul, had tasted a different world. And perhaps that taste, fleeting as it was, made the rest of the year's inequalities just a little easier to swallow. When the Nile swelled beyond its banks, painting the desert with ribbons of fertile black silt, Egypt didn't just give thanks, it threw a spectacle that would make modern parades seem tame. The Opet festival, centered in Thebes, was less a religious event and more a cosmic drama where the pharaoh himself became both actor and stage. Imagine the scene: the golden bark of Amun-Ra, the sun god, carried by priests from Karnak temple to Luxor, its route lined with thousands chanting, dancing, and scattering flowers. The air would thicken with incense as musicians played sistrums and harps, their melodies syncing with the river's rhythmic lapping against the docks. But this wasn't just pageantry, it was a carefully choreographed reaffirmation of the world's order. The pharaoh, believed to be the god's earthly incarnation, would enter Luxor's inner sanctum alone, emerging days later, recharged with divine authority. In a land where the Nile's whims dictated life or famine, Opet transformed the river's flood from a natural event into a theological necessity. The festival's timing was no accident. Falling in the second month of Akit, the inundation season Opet coincided with the Nile's peak, when the waters carried not just silt but symbolism. Ancient Egyptians saw the flood as the tears of Isis mourning Osiris, its richness a gift from the underworld. By aligning the festival with this moment, priests wove the river's life-giving power into the pharaoh's legitimacy. The procession route itself mirrored this connection, Karnak representing the chaotic primeval waters of creation, to Luxor symbolizing the ordered world. As Amun-Ra's bark moved between them, it enacted the universe's rebirth just as the Nile's flood renewed the land. Even the statues bathed en route weren't mere idols, they were vessels for the god's presence, their ritual cleansing mirroring the field's saturation with fertile mud. What's astonishing is how Opet's rituals turned geography into theology. The festival's climax, the union of the two lands, wasn't just political propaganda. When the pharaoh raised the Djed pillar, a symbol of stability beside the Nile, he wasn't merely performing, he was channeling. The pillar's verticality contrasted with the river's horizontality, creating a sacred crossroads where heaven, earth, and underworld intersected. This act, repeated annually, convinced a civilization that their king didn't just rule by divine right, he sustained the very fabric of reality. Fail to perform it, and the Nile might withhold its gift. Modern scholars once dismissed this as superstition until archaeology revealed a chilling correlation. During periods of weak pharaohs or missed festivals, Nile flood records show erratic patterns. Whether coincidence or causation, the ancients believed their rituals held the river's balance. The Opet festival's legacy flows into traditions we barely recognize. Ever wonder why New Year's resolutions feel so urgent? The Egyptians made vows during Opet, believing the inundation amplified their words' power. Even our modern love of parade floats traces back to Amun-Ra's bark, its route carefully designed so crowds could feed the god with offerings tossed onto the vessel. But perhaps the most profound echo is in our language. The word adoration comes from the Latin adoratio, meaning to speak to the divine, a direct descendant of Opet's processional prayers. What makes Opet extraordinary isn't its grandeur, but its honesty. In an era of climate uncertainty, we're relearning what the Egyptians knew. Water isn't just a resource, it's a relationship. Their festival didn't just celebrate the Nile's flood, it honored humanity's fragile pact with nature, where gratitude and ritual became the currency of survival. When we protect rivers today, we're unknowingly channeling Opet's deepest lesson, that some bonds, like those between a people and their lifeblood, are too sacred to leave to chance. In the heart of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carved life into the desert, the Babylonians didn't just celebrate the new year, they waged war against chaos itself. The Akitu festival, spanning 12 dizzying days, was more than a calendar reset. It was a cosmic drama where the fate of the world hung in the balance. Picture the scene: the king of Babylon, draped in royal finery, approaching the statue of Marduk, the city's patron god. But instead of receiving honors, he's stripped of his crown, slapped across the face by a priest, and forced to kneel, a shocking act of humiliation that would make any ruler tremble. Yet this wasn't punishment, it was purification. By enduring this ritual, the king symbolically absorbed the sins of his people, clearing the slate for a fresh year. Only after confessing his faults and swearing renewed devotion would the crown be returned, his authority reborn alongside the world itself. The festival's climax was a spectacle of myth made real. A procession carried Marduk's statue to the Akitu house, a temple outside the city walls, reenacting his legendary battle against Tiamat, the dragon of chaos. Actors playing gods and monsters clashed in staged combat, their shouts echoing across the Euphrates as crowds cheered Marduk's inevitable victory. This wasn't just theater, it was a spiritual necessity. To the Babylonians, chaos wasn't an abstract idea. It was the ever-present threat of drought, invasion, or societal collapse. By ritually defeating Tiamat each year, they reaffirmed humanity's precarious grip on order. Even the festival's timing was strategic. Held at the spring equinox when floods receded and planting began, Akitu tied cosmic renewal to agricultural cycles. Why did chaos loom so large in ancient minds? Across cultures, from Egypt's battles against Apophis to Greece's Olympians subduing the Titans, creation myths share a common thread. The world isn't a given, but a hard-won victory that must be repeatedly defended. The Babylonians understood this viscerally. Their flood-prone land, dependent on erratic rivers, knew nature's destructive power firsthand. Akitu's rituals transformed that vulnerability into agency. If chaos could be ritually defeated, it could be kept at bay. The king's temporary fall and rise mirrored the Earth's own cycles of decay and rebirth, while the mock battle served as a collective exorcism of society's anxieties. What's startling is how Akitu's echoes persist in traditions we've sanitized of their primal urgency. The Jewish Yom Kippur, with its confessional prayers and symbolic cleansing, carries whispers of the king's humiliation. Our New Year's resolutions, those annual promises of self-improvement, descend from Akitu's theme of renewal through accountability. Even the ball drop in Times Square, that glittering countdown to midnight, unknowingly channels the Babylonians' belief that time itself must be ritually restarted. But Akitu's deepest lesson lies in its embrace of imperfection. Unlike modern celebrations that often gloss over life's messiness, this festival stared directly into the abyss. The king's public shaming acknowledged that order isn't innate, it's fragile, earned through humility and effort. The Chaos Dragon wasn't vanquished forever. She was held back for another year, her defeat requiring constant vigilance. In an age of climate crises and social upheaval, Akitu feels unnervingly relevant. It reminds us that renewal isn't about pretending the darkness doesn't exist. It's about mustering the courage to light a candle anyway, knowing the battle begins anew each dawn. In the heart of ancient Athens, as autumn's chill crept over the olive groves, something extraordinary happened. The city's women took control. For 3 days each year, the Thusmophoria transformed ordinary wives and mothers into guardians of civilization's survival. Picture the scene: women dressed in white, their hair woven with ivy, processing up the hillside to secret sanctuaries where no man dared follow. They carried torches and baskets holding objects so sacred their exact nature was never recorded, only whispered about in hushed tones. This wasn't just a festival, it was a carefully orchestrated rebellion against the rigid patriarchy of Greek society, a fleeting moment when the power to feed or starve an entire city rested in female hands. At the center of these mysteries lay a ritual as bizarre as it was potent: the burial and retrieval of piglets. Months before the festival, women would descend into snake-infested caverns to place the tiny corpses into pits lined with pine branches. When the time came, they'd retrieve the decomposed remains, mixing them with seeds before scattering them across fields. To modern eyes, this might seem grotesque, but to the Greeks, it was pure alchemy: death transformed into life, decay into fertility. The piglet's connection to Demeter ran deep. Legend said the goddess's daughter Persephone was tending swine when Hades dragged her to the underworld. By reenacting this cycle of burial and resurrection, the women weren't just ensuring next year's harvest, they were embodying the goddess's power to turn loss into abundance. What made the Thesmophoria revolutionary wasn't just its rituals, but its radical exclusivity. In a society where women couldn't vote, own property, or walk unveiled in public, these secret rites created a parallel world of female authority. The festival's name itself, Thusmophoria, hinted at its subversive nature, meaning the carrying of things laid down. Some scholars believe this referred not just to the piglets, but to the unspoken laws women established in their temporary autonomous zone. During these days, they could just about men's inadequacies, share knowledge of herbal contraceptives, or even, as Aristophanes scandalously suggested in his comedy, Thesmophoria Zeusi, hold mock trials to judge male behavior. For a brief window, the social order flipped. Men stayed home with the children, nervously wondering what their wives might be plotting. The festival's timing was no accident. Held just before the autumn planting, it acknowledged women's primal connection to the earth cycles. While men waged wars and debated in the agora, it was women who preserved the grain stores, calculated how much seed to save, and knew which fields lay fallow. The Thesmophoria honored this unsung expertise, turning domestic knowledge into sacred rite. The piglet ritual itself mirrored women's daily labor, like composting kitchen scraps to nourish herb gardens, but elevated to cosmic significance. Even the festival's requirement of sexual abstinence beforehand wasn't merely about purity. It was a declaration that fertility belonged to the community, not just to husbands. Perhaps the most intriguing legacy of the Thesmophoria is how it challenges our assumptions about ancient gender roles. Modern excavations have revealed that some of these secret sanctuaries were lavishly decorated, with terracotta figurines depicting women laughing, dancing, and most strikingly, sitting on thrones like goddesses. These artifacts suggest the festival wasn't just tolerated by the patriarchy, but actively feared. The playwright Aeschylus hinted as much when he described the Thusmophoria's rites as too terrible to speak of, a rare admission of male anxiety. In a world where women's bodies were policed and their voices suppressed, these autumn days proved something dangerous. That civilization depended on forces men could neither control nor fully understand. The festival's echoes linger in unexpected places. Ever wonder why harvest festivals often feature corn dollies or seed-swapping ceremonies? These are distant cousins to the Thesmophoria's agricultural magic. Even the tradition of women's circles and secret societies, from medieval midwife guilds to modern feminist covens, carries whispers of those Athenian hillsides where, for 3 days each year, Demeter's daughters remembered their power. The piglets may have rotted away, but the message endured. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin in darkness, tended by hands the world overlooks. High in the Andes, where the June air grew thin and frigid, the Inca faced their darkest fear, not enemies or hunger, but the possibility that the sun might abandon them forever. In Raymi, the Festival of the Sun wasn't just a celebration, it was an act of cosmic diplomacy. As the winter solstice approached, Cusco transformed into a stage where gold gleamed like captured sunlight. Priests chanted in the sacred tongue of Quechua, and the Sapa Inca himself became the living bridge between earth and heaven. Imagine the tension, the entire empire holding its breath as the sun reached its lowest point, unsure if their rituals would be enough to coax it back. The ceremony began before dawn, with nobles and priests ascending to the hilltop fortress of Sacsayhuaman, their robes woven with threads of silver and gold. At the precise moment the sun's first rays touched the horizon, the Sapa Inca would raise 2 golden cups, one filled with chicha, the sacred corn beer, the other empty. As he poured the chicha into the waiting vessel, the liquid became more than an offering. It was a mirror of the sun's own journey, spilling from winter's scarcity into summer's abundance. Nearby, priests used polished golden discs to catch the sunlight and redirect its beams onto piles of straw, igniting sacred flames that would burn throughout the coming year. This wasn't just symbolism, it was celestial engineering, humanity intervening in the mechanics of the cosmos. What set Inti Raymi apart was its sheer physicality. Unlike distant gods who ruled from Olympus or Asgard, Inti the sun god was a visceral presence. The Inca believed he demanded not just prayers, but proof of devotion. White llamas, their fleece dyed crimson with achiote paste, were sacrificed in precise numbers, their lungs examined by priests for omens, their blood sprinkled on temple walls as a shimmering offering. Even the festival's dances weren't mere entertainment. Warriors stomped in rhythmic unison to mimic earthquakes, a reminder that the earth's stability depended on the sun's favor. Every gesture, from the Sapa Inca's golden sandals to the corn kernels scattered along procession routes, carried weight. The festival's climax revealed the Inca's genius for blending politics with cosmology. As the Sapa Inca drank from a golden cup, nobles and provincial governors followed suit with vessels of decreasing preciousness, a tangible hierarchy reflecting the empire's structure. Yet this wasn't just about power, it was about shared responsibility. By participating, regional leaders became co-guarantors of the Solar Pact, binding their people to the central authority through collective ritual. The message was clear: just as the sun sustained all equally, so too must the empire function as a single organism. Inti Raymi's legacy endures in ways both visible and hidden. Modern Cusco still reenacts the festival each June, though the golden cups are replicas and the sacrifices symbolic. More subtly, the Andean concept of Aini, reciprocity between humans, nature, and gods, shapes indigenous communities' relationships with the land today. When farmers leave coca leaves as offerings before planting, or when weavers bury threads in the earth after finishing a textile, they're practicing Inti Raymi's core belief that the sacred isn't separate from daily life, but woven into its every stitch. Perhaps the festival's most profound lesson is its rejection of passive worship. The Inca didn't wait for the sun's return, they enacted it through gold and dance and blood, turning anxiety into action. In a world where climate change makes our own relationship with nature increasingly precarious, Inti Raymi whispers an unsettling question: what rituals of responsibility have we forgotten, and what might happen if we fail to reinvent them? When the Norse longfires burned longest against winter's endless night, their Yule celebrations held more than feasts, they held a breathless vigil. Beyond the crackling warmth of the Yule log, villagers whispered of Odin's wild hunt, a spectral cavalcade tearing across storm-lashed skies. The god himself led this ghostly parade, his eight-legged steed Sleipnir pounding through the clouds as fallen warriors and restless spirits howled in his wake. To hear the hunt's baying hounds was no mere superstition, it was an omen. Some said it heralded disaster, others believed catching sight of the riders meant being swept into the afterlife. So families huddled close, spinning tales of valor to drown out the wind's shrieks, their mead horns raised not just in cheer, but as shields against the unseen. This marriage of merriment and dread reveals how the Norse viewed winter not as mere hardship, but as a thinning of reality's veil. The Yule log, often an entire oak tree fed slowly into the flames, wasn't just for heat. Its constant light mirrored the sun's stubborn persistence, a defiant counter to the hunt's darkness. Even the tradition of leaving offerings porridge for the Tomtfarm spirits, straw for Odin's horse, walked a line between hospitality and protection. Every custom acknowledged that winter was a time when the rules softened, when gods, spirits, and humans shared the same precarious space. The wild hunt's imagery wasn't unique to Scandinavia. Celtic lore spoke of Herne the hunter leading lost souls, while Germanic traditions told of Frau Holl shaking snow from her feather beds as spectral riders passed beneath. What linked these myths was the primal understanding that winter wasn't empty, it was alive with invisible forces. The Norse, however, gave it teeth. Their sagas described the hunt's riders as both damned and divine, with Odin wearing his traveler's cloak, gathering souls not as a reaper, but as a chooser of the worthy. This duality transformed Yule from a simple solstice feast into a drama of cosmic stakes. Why did these stories grip the Norse imagination so fiercely? The answer lies in their landscape, in lands where winter could bury villages under snowdrifts for months, where the sun barely crested the horizon. Darkness wasn't poetic, it was existential. The wild hunt personified that terror, but also offered a perverse comfort. If winter had a shape, it could be faced. Feasting became a weapon, laughter a rebellion. The 12-day Yule celebration, with its boar sacrifices and oath swearing on bristles, wasn't just marking time, it was outlasting the dark through sheer stubborn joy. Modern Yuletide traditions still carry echoes of this defiance. That jolly figure racing across rooftops with reindeer, a sanitized descendant of Odin's ghostly ride. Carolers singing door to door unknowingly reenact the custom of wassailing, where songs warded off malign spirits. Even our obsession with holiday lights traces back to those Norse longfires, pushing back the longest night one flame at a time. The wild hunt may have faded into folklore, but its lesson endures. Winter's darkness is best faced together, with stories as our shield and feasts as our fire. When the willows turned emerald along the rivers of ancient China, families didn't just remember their ancestors, they set places for them at the table. Kingaming Festival, known as Tomb Sweeping Day, transformed graveyards into lively gathering spaces where the boundary between living and dead grew deliciously thin. Picture this: children chasing kites shaped like carp over hills dotted with graves, while elders carefully arranged plates of kingtuan, sticky rice dumplings tinted jade green with mugwort beside headstones. The air buzzed with chatter as much as reverence as families updated their departed on marriages, births, and harvests. This wasn't morbid ritual, it was the ultimate family reunion, where missing a single year risked leaving ancestors feeling neglected, and according to tradition, a displeased ancestor could bring misfortune as easily as a pleased one might bless the crops. The genius of Kingaming lay in its seamless fusion of practicality and spirituality. Sweeping tombs wasn't just symbolic, it prevented wildfires in dry spring grasses while symbolically clearing misfortune. Willow's branches hung over doors weren't mere decorations. Their flexible wood embodied resilience, teaching descendants to bend without breaking like the tree that survives the storm. Even the timing was deliberate, falling precisely 15 days after the spring equinox. Kingaming coincided with the Earth's awakening, making ancestral veneration part of nature's renewal cycle. Families didn't just honor the past, they planted seeds near graves, intertwining memory with the promise of future growth. What's striking is how Kingaming's rituals turned grief into continuity. Unlike summer Western memorials, these visits often included picnics where ancestors were served their favorite foods. A sip of wine poured onto the earth here, a steamed bun broken open there, creating a sensory bridge across time. The burning of joss paper, folded into gold ingots or even modern paper smartphones, wasn't superstition. It was a poignant acknowledgement that the afterlife had its own economy, and filial piety didn't end with death. Scholars have found Tang Dynasty poems describing how the wealthy would hire professional mourners to wail at graves, not as hypocrisy, but as cultural theater reinforcing communal bonds. Modern Kingaming reveals fascinating adaptations. Urban families now send digital, grave-sweeping services when they can't visit in person, while biodegradable paper offerings reflect environmental concerns. Yet the core remains unchanged, a day when the departed aren't relics but participants. In a Shanghai cemetery recently, a businessman was overheard whispering stock tips to his father's tablet, while a grandmother scolded her late husband for never learning to cook, proof that these conversations, like the festival itself, blend the mundane and sacred into something uniquely alive. This festival's deepest wisdom lies in its refusal to compartmentalize loss. By setting a place at life's table for those who have left, Kingaming suggests that death doesn't sever relationships, it merely changes their table manners. The dumplings shared among tombstones, the laughter mingling with incense smoke, all whisper the same truth. Ancestors aren't gone so long as we keep pulling up chairs for them. At the height of the Aztec harvest season, when maize stores overflowed and the air smelled of roasted amaranth, the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan became the stage for a ritual that turned devotion into a death-defying spectacle. Xochitl Huitzi, the falling fruit festival, centered around a towering pole slicked with grease, its apex crowned with an idol molded from dough mixed with sacrificial blood. Young warriors, their bodies painted in sacred hues of ochre and blue, would attempt to climb this treacherous pole while crowds roared below. Those who slipped faced more than embarrassment. A fall from such heights could mean broken bones or worse. Yet the real prize wasn't just reaching the top, it was capturing the doe figure without toppling, then descending carefully enough to present it intact to the priests below. This wasn't mere sport, it was a physical prayer where every handhold balanced human skill against divine favor. The ritual's danger served a profound theological purpose. The doe idol represented Xochitl, a deity linked to both the evening star and the harvested crops. By risking their safety to retrieve it, participants embodied the Aztec belief that sustenance required sacrifice, not just symbolic offerings, but tangible human effort and courage. The grease-smeared pole mirrored the slippery path between earth and sky, its conquest proving that even the gods' gifts demanded struggle. When the idol finally reached the temple altar, its dough wasn't merely displayed. It was broken into pieces and distributed as sacred sustenance, transforming peril into communal blessing. Physical trials in festivals weren't unique to the Aztecs. The Cherokees' green corn ceremony included grueling ball games where players represented cosmic forces, their collisions mirroring the struggle between seasons. In ancient Greece, the Olympics' chariot races and wrestling matches honored Zeus through mortal exertion. Even Mayan ball games, played on stone courts with a rubber ball weighing up to 9 pounds, carried spiritual stakes. Some scholars believe the losing team's captain was occasionally sacrificed. These challenges shared a common thread. They made abstract faith visceral. It's one thing to pray for a bountiful harvest or divine protection. It's another to dangle from a greased pole or face an opponent in ritual combat where failure carried physical and sometimes mortal consequences. The psychology behind these trials reveals a universal human instinct. When survival depended on unpredictable forces, rains, crops, game migrations, cultures developed rituals that didn't just ask for blessings, but demonstrated worthiness to receive them. The Aztec climbers' trembling muscles, the Greek sprinters' burning lungs, the Cherokee ball players' bruised limbs, all became living sacrifices, proof of devotion written in sweat and strain. In an era before scientific certainty, these physical acts created a tangible link between human effort and cosmic order, reassuring communities that their fate wasn't entirely at the mercy of capricious gods. Modern echoes of Xochitl Huitzi linger in unexpected places. Rock climbing gyms might seem worlds apart from Mesoamerican rituals, yet both transform vertical ascents into tests of focus and resilience. Even team-building exercises that involve trust falls or obstacle courses tap into the same ancient impulse to bond through shared physical challenge. The Aztecs would likely nod in recognition at today's marathon runners pushing through the wall, their exhaustion a secular echo of that greased pole's spiritual trial. Both whisper the same timeless lesson. Some truths can't be learned through words alone. They must be grasped quite literally, with bleeding hands and aching muscles, proof that devotion in any era demands more than belief. It demands guts. When the summer heat hung heavy over Japan like a damp silk robe, villages and cities alike prepared for visitors' unseen ancestors returning home for Mabon. Lanterns flickered to life outside houses, their soft glow cutting through the dusk to guide spirits along familiar paths. This wasn't a summer vigil, but a reunion brimming with laughter, music, and the hypnotic pulse of taiko drums. The Bon Odori dance, with its circular movements and flowing sleeves, wasn't just performance. It was an invitation, a way for the living to mirror the rhythms of the unseen world. Families laid out platters of cucumbers and eggplant carved into spirit horses and oxen vehicles to speed their ancestors' arrival and departure. For 3 days, the boundary between worlds grew porous, and death became not a void but a temporary absence. What made Mabon extraordinary was its seamless fusion of Buddhist solemnity and Shinto joy. Buddhist teachings framed the festival as a time to honor the dead's journey through the cycle of rebirth, with sutras chanted to ease their passage. Yet Shinto's influence shimmered in the celebration's exuberance, the way communities transformed graveyards into picnic spots, sharing stories and sake with ancestors as if they'd simply stepped out for a stroll. Even the floating lanterns released down rivers on the festival's final night carried this duality. Their journey symbolized Buddhist impermanence, while the act of sending them off with cheers and song reflected Shinto's embrace of life's fleeting beauty. The festival's timing during peak summer wasn't arbitrary. In agrarian Japan, mid-August marked a brief lull between planting and harvest, a rare moment when families could pause and reflect. The dances often mimicked planting or fishing movements, weaving labor into liturgy. Villagers in coastal regions even staged mock boat departures, reenacting legendary voyages to the afterlife. These weren't mere theatrics, they anchored cosmic concepts in the grit of daily life, reminding participants that the sacred wasn't separate from the soil beneath their feet. Modern Mabon reveals how traditions adapt without losing their soul. Tokyo's skyscraper districts now host neon-lit Bon Odori circles where office workers dance in yukata after clocking out. In Hawaii, the festival blends Japanese customs with Hawaiian chants and ukulele music, yet the core remains unchanged, a conviction that the departed aren't gone, just momentarily out of sight. When lanterns drift downstream today, their light bobbing like fireflies, they carry the same ancient promise that next summer, when the heat rises and the cicadas sing, the veil will thin again. When the first buds of spring trembled on Persian pomegranate trees, entire households erupted into a flurry of preparation, not just cleaning, but a sacred reordering of the world. Nora's, meaning New Day, wasn't merely a New Year's celebration. It was a 13-day masterclass in cosmic housekeeping. At its heart stood the Haft-Seen table, a meticulously arranged spread where every item began with the Persian letter, Sin, and crackled with symbolism. Sprouted lentils symbolized rebirth, garlic stood guard against evil, sumac berries represented the sunrise's crimson glow. Even the humble apple held its own as an emblem of beauty and health. But this wasn't just a pretty centerpiece, it was a microcosm of existence where the act of placing each object became a meditation on balance. Families would spend weeks preparing, not out of obligation, because Nora's taught that renewal wasn't passive, it demanded participation down to the last saffron-tinted egg. The festival's most breathtaking ritual unfolded outdoors as dusk painted the horizon. Flames leaped in communal bonfires, their light dancing against the fading day as men, women, and children lined up to jump over them. With each vault, voices rose in unison. My yellowness to you, your redness to me. This wasn't pyromania, it was alchemy. The chant transformed fire from destroyer to purifier, exchanging one's pallor of winter sickness for the blaze vitality. Zoroastrians, the ancient faith that birthed Nora's, revered fire as the ultimate cleanser, a divine intermediary between humanity and wisdom. By leaping through its lick, participants didn't just observe renewal, they physically passed through its gateway, emerging scoured of grudges and lethargy. What's astonishing is how Nora's absorbed countless cultures without losing its core. From the steppes of Central Asia to Kurdish mountain villages, variations flourished. Azeris planted wheatgrass weeks early to adorn tables, while Afghans staged buzkashi horse games. The Ottomans adapted it into Sultan Nevras, complete with poetry contests. Even diaspora communities today, from Los Angeles to London, reinvent traditions while keeping the Haft-Seen's essence intact. This adaptability reveals the festival's genius. It framed universal anxieties about time, decay, hope, through rituals flexible enough to mold to any context yet precise enough to feel sacred. Beneath the vibrant customs lay a radical philosophy. Unlike Western New Year's resolutions focused on self-improvement, Nora's emphasized collective harmony with nature, ancestors, and community. The 13th day's Sizda Bidar picnic, where families abandoned their homes to feast outdoors, wasn't just fun. It completed a cycle. The sprouted greens from the haft scene were cast into flowing water, carrying away negativity while nourishing the ecosystem. Every act whispered the same truth. Personal renewal meant nothing without planetary reciprocity. Modern Noah's celebrations pulse with this ancient heartbeat. When Iranian households today shake their doors at the exact equinox moment, a tradition called Kune Tekun, or shaking the house, they're not just making noise. They're reenacting the primal shudder of a universe resetting, a reminder that some rhythms transcend calendars and politics. In a world fractured by borders, Nora's endures as a whisper from our shared past. That spring doesn't care who you pray to, only that you notice when it knocks and have the courage to jump over fire to meet it. When the first winter swells rolled across the Hawaiian archipelago, something extraordinary happened. The clatter of wooden weapons ceased. For 4 sacred months, warriors laid down their clubs, chiefs sheathed their daggers, and the islands exhaled into Makahiki, a festival so vital it transformed warfare from a rite into a transgression. At its heart stood Lono, the long-faced god of clouds and cultivation, whose image, a crossbeam hung with white copper cloth, traveled in clockwise procession around each island. Villagers who spotted this emblem approaching knew the time had come to trade battle cries for something far more demanding, feats of strength, strategy, and endurance that would determine the coming year's prosperity. The games of Makahiki weren't mere entertainment, they were a cosmic audit. As Lono's priests collected taxes in the form of food, bark cloth, and feathers, commoners and alii alike competed in contests that mirrored the god's own struggles. Surfing became a sacred act, its waves ridden on boards blessed by kahuna. Runners raced across sharp lava rock barefoot, their bloody footprints proof of devotion. Most astonishing was the Ulu Maker, a stone bowling game where players hurled discoid stones between 2 stakes, their accuracy believed to influence crop yields. Victory wasn't about personal glory, it demonstrated a community's collective mana or spiritual power. The stakes were tangible. Poor performances could mean drought or famine, while excellence might coax abundant rains from Lono's cloud-heavy domain. What modern societies often miss about Makahiki is its radical pragmatism. This wasn't utopian pacifism, it was survival strategy. By suspending war during the wet season, Hawaiians ensured uninterrupted time to plant, fish, and repair terraces. The tax collection, often misunderstood as simple tribute, functioned as a redistribution system. Surplus from fertile areas flowed to leaner regions, preventing hoarding. Even the games served ecological purposes. Boxing matches and wrestling tournaments channeled aggressive instincts into ritualized outlets, while hula performances preserved genealogies and navigation chants better than any written record. The festival's genius lay in weaving peace into the very fabric of necessity, making it as indispensable as rainfall. The closing ceremony revealed Makahiki's deepest wisdom. As the festival waned, a runner circled the island counter-clockwise, symbolically rolling up the kapu of peace while warriors resharpened their weapons. This deliberate transition acknowledged that both peace and conflict had their seasons, their sacred purposes. Contemporary conflict resolution studies now echo what Hawaiians knew centuries ago. That sustained peace requires not just the absence of war, but structures that make violence inconvenient. The Polynesian concept of ha'ponopono, or restorative reconciliation, likely grew from these seasonal pauses, proving that time-limited ceasefires can cultivate permanent tools for harmony. Today's Makahiki revivals, from Hawaii to California, carry whispers of this ancestral brilliance. Modern athletes compete in ancient games while scholars reconstruct Lono's rituals, but the festival's true legacy lies in its challenge to our non-stop world. In an era of perpetual connectivity and endless conflict, Makahiki asks, what if we designated seasons where certain struggles were simply forbidden? Not from weakness, but from the strength to recognize that some harvests, whether of crops or wisdom, require fallow periods. The warriors who once set down their weapons understood something we're still learning. That peace isn't the absence of tension, but the presence of alternatives so compelling, even war can wait. When the final brittle days of Slavic winter clung to the land like an unwelcome guest, villages erupted in a week-long rebellion of butter, fire, and laughter known as Maslenitsa. This wasn't just a festival, it was a full-throated roar against the season's tyranny. Imagine tables groaning under stacks of blini, those golden pancakes round as the sun, each slathered with enough butter to make a dairy farmer weep. Buttery indulgence wasn't gluttony, it was alchemy, transforming simple ingredients into edible talismans meant to summon warmth and abundance. Meanwhile, children clambered onto ice slides, their shrieks of joy slicing through the cold, a deliberate act of noise to frighten away winter's lingering spirits. Every bite, every scream, every flickering candle was a tiny revolution against the dark. The festival's climax was as brutal as it was beautiful. The burning of Lady Maslenitsa, a towering straw effigy dressed in rags and ribbons. Crowds would hurl insults at her as flames consumed the figure. "You've frozen our bones long enough," or "take your gloom and never return." This wasn't mere destruction, it was psychological warfare against the season itself. By giving winter a face, a body, even a mocking name, Slavs turned an intangible force into something that could be confronted, defeated, and ceremonially expelled. The ashes scattered across fields weren't just debris, they were a promise, fertile ground for spring's arrival. Why did cultures worldwide insist on personifying seasons? The answer lies in our brain's hardwired need to narrativize the abstract. A freezing wind isn't just air current, it's the breath of the Frost King. The retreat of snow isn't physics, it's Persephone escaping the underworld. This personification transforms passive suffering into active drama, where humans aren't victims but participants in a grand, cyclical story. The Greeks had Persephone's descent explaining winter, the Norse blamed Skadi's icy wrath. Maslenitsa's genius was making winter not just a villain, but a foe who could be ritually humiliated and driven out. Modern echoes of Maslenitsa's fiery theatrics linger in unexpected places. Ever burned a list of regrets on New Year's Eve? That's Maslenitsa's catharsis in miniature. Even our love-hate relationship with winter, complaining about snowstorms while sipping hot cocoa, carries whispers of those Slavic villagers who knew seasons weren't just weather, but characters to be reckoned with. The festival's deepest magic wasn't in the blini or the bonfires, but in the act of turning cosmic indifference into a story where humans could, for one glorious week, seize the narrative and write their own ending. Under the vast Australian night sky, where the Milky Way stretched like a shimmering river, Aboriginal communities gathered for corroborees that weren't mere performances, they were living portals to the dreamtime. Picture the scene, dancers adorned with intricate white ochre patterns mapping celestial constellations, their movements echoing the journeys of ancestral beings who shaped the land. Each stomp of bare feet sent vibrations through the earth, a deliberate resonance believed to awaken the creative energies of the rainbow serpent or the lightning-fast exploits of the Wagil. This wasn't entertainment, it was an act of cosmic cartography, where every song line and dance step preserved directions to waterholes, warnings of taboo sites, and the sacred laws of existence itself. The body paint worn during these ceremonies held layers of meaning invisible to untrained eyes. Cross-hatched designs mimicked the tracks left by honey ants, guiding initiates to food sources during drought. Dot patterns replicated star formations used for navigation across the desert. Even the colors carried ancestral wisdom. Red ochre from iron-rich cliffs symbolized the lifeblood of the earth, while white clay from riverbeds represented spiritual cleansing. These weren't arbitrary decorations, they were wearable libraries, their pigments mixed with the very soil of sacred sites to create a tactile connection between dancer and country. When a performer's limbs moved through the firelight, the design seemed to shift and shimmer, visually retelling how ancestral spirits transformed rocks into mountains or carved rivers with their spears. How could such complex traditions survive 60,000 years without written language? The answer lies in the Aboriginal mastery of memory as a sacred technology. Elders didn't merely recite stories, they encoded them in multisensory layers through the cadence of clapsticks mimicking animal gaits, the scent of burning eucalyptus leaves marking ceremonial stages, or the taste of bush tomatoes shared at specific points in the narrative. Children learned through immersion, not just listening but feeling the vibrations of didgeridoos in their chests as they slept, the sound waves imprinting dreamtime knowledge at a cellular level. Recent neuroscience studies suggest these methods activated episodic memory pathways far more effectively than rote memorization, creating recall so precise it could guide someone across hundreds of miles using nothing but song lyrics describing landmarks. The corroboree's endurance reveals a radical truth about time's fluidity in Aboriginal cosmology. Unlike Western festivals tied to calendars, these rituals often followed ecological cues, the flowering of desert peas signaling when to perform honey ant dances, or the arrival of monsoon winds triggering cyclone avoidance ceremonies. This wasn't superstition, it was sophisticated environmental synchronization. When a dancer embodied the kangaroo ancestor, they weren't just honoring the past, they were maintaining a continuum where dream time never ended, only manifested differently across generations. The same dance that guided ancestors to water now taught children about groundwater conservation, proving tradition could be both ancient and urgently contemporary. Modern corroborees still pulse with this timeless heartbeat, though some now incorporate acrylic paints alongside ochre or share stages with DJs at cultural festivals. What remains unchanged is the profound understanding that ceremony isn't about preserving culture under glass, it's about striking the earth with your feet until the ancestors recognize the rhythm and answer. When tourists watch these performances today, they're not just seeing a show, they're witnessing the oldest unbroken festival tradition on Earth, one that turns memory into something you can taste in the smoke, feel in the drum's throb, and follow like starlight home. When autumn's first chill crept across ancient Judea, families abandoned sturdy homes for flimsy huts roofed with palm fronds, walls that shuddered in the wind, ceilings that let in starlight and rain. Sukkot wasn't just a harvest festival, it was an annual act of vulnerability, a deliberate choice to trade security for the visceral memory of 40 years spent wandering the desert. Every rustle of the sucker's walls whispered the same truth: abundance is fleeting, but why would a celebration of harvest plenty, when granaries brimmed with grain and pomegranates split with ripe seeds, insist on such discomfort? The answer lies in the festival's brutal elegance. By pairing the harvest's exuberance with the sucker's fragility, Sukkot performed a spiritual sleight of hand, transforming gratitude from passive appreciation into an active reckoning with impermanence. The Sukkah's design specifications reveal its deeper purpose. Jewish law mandates that the structure must be temporary enough to sway in the wind, its roof sparse enough that one can still see the stars. This wasn't architectural oversight, it was theological precision. Under that patchy canopy, families dining on harvest feasts would glance upward and remember their ancestors' desert sojourn, where survival depended on daily miracles like manna from heaven. The contrast was intentional. The same hands that now gathered sheaves of wheat had once clutched at uncertain futures. Even the 4 species waved during Sukkot, palm, myrtle, willow, and citron, symbolized this duality. Bound together, they represented unity. Shaken in all directions, they acknowledged life's unpredictability. Ancient cultures worldwide shared this instinct to ritualize fragility. The Roman Feast of Tabernacles saw farmers sleeping in vine-draped booths during harvest, while Native American tribes held corn dances in open fields vulnerable to weather. What made Sukkot unique was its refusal to let prosperity erase memory. While other harvest festivals reveled in sheer abundance, think of Greece's Thesmophoria or China's Mid-Autumn Festival, Sukkot wove hardship into celebration. Families might decorate their sukkah with gourds and ribbons, but no ornament could disguise its fundamental instability. This tension between gratitude and humility wasn't accidental. It was the festival's beating heart. Modern Sukkot celebrations still carry this wisdom. In Brooklyn today, you'll see sukkahs wedged between brownstones, their plywood walls wrapped in tapestries as children string popcorn garlands overhead. The CEO and the college student alike eat meals where rain might drip into their soup. For 8 days, the entire community becomes performance artists of impermanence, their laughter and songs mingling with the creak of temporary walls. Psychologists now recognize what the ancients intuited, that practicing discomfort, whether through fasting, digital detoxes, or sukkah dwelling, reshapes our relationship to privilege. By voluntarily embracing fragility, we rehearse resilience. The festival's closing ceremony, Hoshana Rabbah, drives the lesson home. Worshippers circle the synagogue 7 times, beating willow branches against the ground until leaves scatter like raw confessions. The stripped branches symbolize prayers released, but also life's inevitable shedding of comforts. In a world obsessed with building higher walls and fuller bank accounts, Sukkot's flimsy huts stand as counter-monuments, not to survival's hardship, but to the liberating truth that our deepest security was never in the walls we build, but in the hands we hold beneath the stars. At the height of summer, when the sun lingered longest over the rolling green hills of ancient Britain, the Druids didn't just observe the solstice, they conducted a celestial conversation. Stonehenge's massive pillars, aligned with surgical precision to catch the first golden rays of Alban Hefin, weren't merely a calendar, they were an altar where earth and sky shook hands. Picture the scene, white-robed figures gathering at dawn, their bronze sickles glinting as they harvested mistletoe from sacred oaks, the plant's pearly berries believed to hold the sun's essence. Every cut was timed, every gesture calculated, not blind ritual, but a choreography honed over generations of watching how light kissed the land. What set the Druids apart wasn't superstition, but their fusion of spirituality with what we'd now call empirical science. Their reverence for mistletoe, for instance, went beyond myth. Modern research reveals the plant's unique phytochemical properties, immunostimulants, and antitumor compounds that ancient healers likely observed through trial and error. When Pliny the Elder described Druids performing mistletoe rites with golden sickles, he noted they never let the plant touch the ground, preserving its potency. This wasn't just symbolism. It mirrored practical knowledge of aerial plants' delicate biochemistry. Their solstice celebrations doubled as a grand experiment in phenology, the study of cyclic natural events where standing stones functioned as fixed reference points to track subtle shifts in sunrise angles over centuries. The true brilliance of Alban-Hefn lay in its duality. While the festival honored Belenus, the solar god whose name meant Shining One, it also served as an agricultural checkpoint. Bonfires lit on hilltops weren't solely spiritual beacons. Their smoke carried ash rich in potassium and phosphorus to fertilize distant fields. The Druids' famed oak and mistletoe ritual, often misunderstood as primitive idolatry, reflected deep ecological understanding. Oaks hosting mistletoe were biodiversity hotspots, supporting over 300 insect species. By venerating these symbiotic relationships, Druidic practice encoded conservation principles long before the term existed. Stonehenge's alignments reveal even more sophistication. Recent laser surveys show its stones aren't just positioned for the solstice sunrise, but also frame key lunar standstills events occurring only every 6 years. This implies generations of Druids meticulously passing down observational data to construct a monument functioning as both temple and astronomical computer. Their sky scripture included more than solar movements. They tracked Venus's cycles and possibly even predicted eclipses, using patterns later confirmed by Greek astronomers. The Welsh myth of the sorceress Ceridwen's cauldron, which granted wisdom after a year and a day, may metaphorize this long-term celestial study. Knowledge simmered slowly, distilled through patient observation. Modern solstice celebrations at Stonehenge, with their mix of neo-Druids and curious tourists, still echo this harmony of wonder and precision. When dawn's first light slips between those ancient pillars today, it illuminates more than pagan revivalism. It highlights humanity's timeless urge to find meaning in the cosmos's rhythms. The Druids teach us that the line between science and spirituality was once as thin as a mistletoe thread, and that true reverence for nature demands both a poet's heart and a mathematician's mind. Their legacy lingers every time we pause to marvel at a perfect sunset, sensing, even if unconsciously, that we're standing where earth and sky still whisper secrets to those willing to listen. As the final days of the Mayan calendar crumbled away like old parchment, entire cities held their breath. These 5 days, known as Wayeb, weren't just a time between years. They were a gap in the fabric of the cosmos when the usual rules of existence hung suspended. Imagine the scene: market stalls shuttered, children hushed indoors, even the normally bustling ball courts lying silent under an uneasy sky. The Maya didn't celebrate this time, they endured it, treating each moment like a step across thin ice. Paintings from the Dresden Codex show gods of destruction stalking these days, their skeletal jaws agape, while ordinary people crouched in their homes, avoiding loud noises, sharp objects, even unnecessary speech. This wasn't superstition. It was a cultural survival mechanism honed by centuries of observing nature's brutal whims. The genius of Wayeb lay in its brutal honesty about life's fragility. Unlike other cultures that marked the new year with fireworks and feasting, the Maya carved out space to acknowledge the truth that sometimes the world tilts toward chaos. Their 365-day Hob calendar deliberately left these 5 days unnamed and unnumbered, a mathematical admission that time itself could slip its leash. Archaeologists have found evidence of Wayeb houses, small temporary structures where families would retreat, often burning copal resin to create a protective veil of smoke. The rituals weren't about warding off abstract evil, but specific, well-documented threats: hurricanes that could erase harvests, droughts that cracked the earth like a broken pot, or unexpected conflicts flaring at society's edges. By dedicating time to collective vulnerability, the Maya transformed fear from a paralyzing force into a shared cultural practice. What's fascinating is how deeply astronomy shaped this festival of dread. The 5 unlucky days corresponded to the zenith passage of the Pleiades, a cluster the Maya called Tiz-Ab, meaning rattlesnake's tail. When these stars aligned directly overhead, it signaled the start of the rainy season's most volatile period. Modern meteorology confirms their intuition. Late April to early May marks the transition between dry and wet seasons in Mesoamerica, when weather systems collide unpredictably. The Maya didn't just mythologize this danger, they quantified it, their observatories tracking celestial patterns that informed when to plant, when to harvest, and crucially, when to hide. The legacy of Wayeb whispers through modern disaster preparedness in unexpected ways. In Japan, the concept of bosai, a preparing for earthquakes as an inevitable part of life, mirrors the Maya's pragmatic acceptance of danger. Even our Friday the 13th superstitions carry faint echoes of those 5 uncounted days, but perhaps the most profound lesson lies in Wayeb's refusal to sugarcoat existence. In an era obsessed with relentless positivity, the Maya teach us that honoring life's darker possibilities isn't pessimism, it's the ultimate act of respect for the delicate balance of all things. Their silent houses and smoldering copal weren't signs of defeat, but of resilience, proving that sometimes survival means knowing when to stop fighting the storm and simply wait it out. That Christmas tree glowing in your living room each December, it's not just a holiday decoration, it's the ghost of a Norse Yule log whispering across centuries. When ancient Germanic tribes dragged evergreen boughs into their homes during winter's darkest days, they weren't thinking about tinsel or presents. They believed these resilient trees, still green when all else withered, held the sun's returning spirit. The candles they fastened to the branches weren't for ambience, they were tiny suns, coaxing the real one back from its winter retreat. Fast forward to 16th century Germany, where Christians adopted the tradition, layering new meaning over old, just as the Roman Church had superimposed Christmas onto Saturnalia's riotous calendar slot. Today, when we argue over tangled lights or debate angel versus star toppers, we're unknowingly reenacting a theological debate that began when Saint Boniface first hung apples on a fir tree to teach pagan converts about Eden. Halloween's transformation is even more startling. Those plastic witch hats and superhero costumes parading through suburban streets, they're distant relatives to the animal skins Celtic villagers wore during Samhain to confuse wandering spirits. The jack-o'-lantern's grinning face evolved from turnips hollowed out by Irish immigrants, their flickering coal embers mimicking the protective bonfires that once ringed villages. Even trick-or-treating carries echoes of souling, where medieval poor would offer prayers for the dead in exchange for soul cakes. What began as a night of genuine terror, when families truly believed the dead might knock, has become a carnival of sugar-fueled make-believe. Yet the bones of the old rituals remain. We still mark autumn's death, still mock the darkness with laughter, still offer treats to ward off tricks. The most pervasive legacy lies in something as simple as the weekend barbecue. That sizzle of burgers on a Saturday afternoon, it's the direct descendant of communal feast fires that once bound villages together. From Lugnasad's harvest breads shared on Irish hilltops to the Incan Pachamanca feasts where meats cooked in earth ovens, communal eating was never just about sustenance, it was the glue of society. The Maori hangi, the Hawaiian lau, the medieval English harvest home, all recognized that sharing food under open skies forged bonds no law could replicate. Modern food trucks and tailgate parties might swap mead for craft beer, but the human impulse remains unchanged. We break bread together because it reminds us, deep in our bones, that survival has always been a team sport. Even time itself carries these ancient fingerprints. Our 7-day week thanked the Babylonians who assigned each day to a celestial body, the Monday blues. Blame the moon god Sin, whose day the Babylonians considered unlucky for work. When we grumble about hump day or celebrate Friday night, we're speaking in codes devised by stargazers millennia ago. The past isn't just present, it's baked into our muscle memory, our language, our very sense of time's rhythm. What's extraordinary isn't that these traditions survived, but how they mutate while retaining their essence. The bonfires that once warded off spirits now light up music festivals. The harvest dances meant to ensure good yields have become TikTok challenges. The rituals didn't fade, they shapeshifted, finding new hosts in each generation. This isn't cultural appropriation, it's cultural evolution, proof that humans will always need ways to mark time, confront fear, and celebrate survival. So next time you bite into a Halloween candy bar or untangle Christmas lights, remember, you're not just following a trend. You're keeping a promise made to the darkness by ancestors who dared to believe light would return. In our always-on, algorithm-driven world, where seasons blur under the glow of screens and harvest cycles are reduced to grocery store restocks, these ancient festivals whisper a radical idea: that time isn't just something to manage, but something to inhabit. The Celts didn't check solstice times on weather apps, they felt winter's arrival in their bones, saw it in the way shadows stretched across frost-hardened fields. The Maya didn't just note equinoxes on a calendar, they built pyramids where sunlight became architecture, slicing through stone corridors with celestial precision. These weren't primitive rituals, they were masterclasses in attentiveness, teaching generations to read the earth's subtle cues long before mindfulness became a buzzword. What's startling is how urgently we need this wisdom today. Climate change isn't just altering weather patterns, it's severed our intuitive connection to those patterns. We adjust thermostats instead of layering clothes, buy strawberries in December without tasting the difference. Ancient festivals offer an antidote. The Incas in Raimi wasn't just sun worship, it was an annual recalibration, aligning human activity with solar cycles to prevent crop failure. Similarly, the Celtic Imbolc, marking the first stirrings of spring beneath winter's grip, trained communities to spot the faintest signs of change, a skill we've traded for push notifications from weather satellites. Relearning these rhythms isn't nostalgia, it's survival strategy. Consider how these traditions fostered resilience through ritual. The Norse Yule log burned for 12 nights, not just for warmth, but to enact perseverance. Feeding the flame became a daily discipline against winter's lethargy. Contrast that with modern burnout culture, where we grind until breaking rather than honoring natural ebbs and flows. Or take the Babylonian Akitu festival, where the king's public humiliation ritual wasn't theater but societal pressure relief, a structured moment to reset power dynamics before tensions erupted. Our ancestors understood what we're relearning through therapy and wellness trends, that rituals aren't escapes from reality, but tools to navigate it. Perhaps most profound is how these festivals redefined abundance. The Greek Thusmophoria and the Celtic Lugnasad both centered on first harvest offerings, not as transactional bribes to gods, but as acts of reciprocal gratitude. When Mayan farmers scattered the first maize kernels back into the soil during Wayeb, they weren't sacrificing profit, they were investing in relationship with the land. In an era of deforestation and monocropping, this ethos, that nature isn't a warehouse to raid, but a partner to nourish, feels revolutionary. The Hopi's Pawamu festival, with its sprouted bean ceremonies, embodied this perfectly. Abundance wasn't hoarded, but cultivated and shared in delicate balance. Rediscovering these traditions doesn't mean abandoning modernity for homemade candles and lunar planting charts. It's about synthesizing ancient wisdom with contemporary life, maybe replacing screen time with stargazing during solstices, or turning Earth Day into a true seasonal marker by planting trees that'll mature with our grandchildren. When Swedish schools still light Lucia Day candles in December or Japanese offices pause for Mabon in August, they're not resisting progress, they're anchoring innovation in cyclical wisdom. The festivals we've forgotten weren't about escaping reality, but diving deeper into it through fire, feast, and collective memory. Their greatest gift wasn't tradition for tradition's sake, but the reminder that we're not just living on the earth, but with it, season by sacred season. From solstice bonfires to harvest dances, ancient festivals were more than just dates on a calendar. They were a living dialogue between humanity and the cosmos. Picture the threads of connection woven through these rituals: the Inca priest catching sunlight in a golden mirror, the Celtic villager jumping over flames to purify the year ahead, the Japanese family floating lanterns to guide ancestral spirits home. Each gesture, whether grand or quiet, carried layers of meaning we're only beginning to decode. These weren't superstitions, they were survival strategies dressed in poetry, ways of aligning human lives with forces far greater than themselves. What's striking is how these traditions balanced awe with practicality. The Mayas' terrifying Wayab festival wasn't just about fearing chaos. It taught communities to prepare for hurricanes and drought. The Norse Yule log's 12-night burn wasn't mere spectacle. It disciplined people through winter's lethargy. Even the riotous Saturnalia, with its role reversals and gift-giving, functioned as social pressure valve, releasing tensions before they could fracture society. Our ancestors didn't just celebrate nature's cycles. They studied them, honored their fragility, and built rituals to navigate their unpredictability. In an age of climate crises and digital overload, that wisdom feels less like history and more like a roadmap. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in how these festivals cultivated gratitude as a daily practice, not just a holiday sentiment. The Greek Thusmophoria's rotten piglets buried to fertilize next year's crops, the Hawaiian Makahikis' tax redistribution feasts, the Slavic Maslenitsa's butter-laden pancakes offered to the sun, these weren't empty gestures. They acknowledged abundance as something fleeting, earned through reciprocity with the land and community. Compare that to today's Black Friday frenzies or disposable fashion, and the contrast stings. These ancient celebrations whisper a radical alternative, that true prosperity isn't about having more, but honoring what sustains us. Yet for all their wisdom, these festivals weren't static. They evolved as people did the Roman Saturnalia, absorbed into Christmas, the Celtic Samhain, morphing into Halloween. Their survival depended not on rigid preservation, but on adaptability. That's the real invitation here, not to recreate bonfires or blood sacrifices, but to rediscover the mindset behind them. What modern rituals could we create to mark the first frost or the spring equinox? How might we design new traditions that honor both our smartphones and the soil beneath our feet? As the camera pulls back from these glimpses into the past, one truth lingers. We're still speaking that ancient language, even if we've forgotten the words. When we gasp at a sunset or gather for harvest meals, we're reaching for the same connection our ancestors forged under different stars. The challenge and the hope is to make that connection conscious again. To not just consume time, but to inhabit it as they did, with all its terrors and wonders intact. So tell me in the comments which of these festivals echoes in your life. Is it the defiant joy of Yule, the quiet watchfulness of Imbolc, or something else entirely? Hit subscribe to keep unraveling history's mysteries with me, and remember, the past isn't dead. It's breathing in the rustle of leaves, the turn of seasons, and the rituals we choose to carry forward. See you in the next